This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Scott Hamilton, a two-term councillor in the City of Cambridge and a mayoral candidate in the upcoming municipal election.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Teresa. Glad to be here.
Okay, so we're going to be focusing on the community of Cambridge today, which is a beautiful community. Some people know it from a certain television show. Some people have actually visited. But you're currently a city councillor there, and you're going to be running for mayor. So that's going to be the large focus of our conversation today. I do want to run it back to when you first joined city council. So you ran in a by-election. This is in the fall of 2020. And if people recall, if they haven't blocked it out, that was not a great time in the province, in the country, in the world at the time. Of course, we had COVID-19 going on. We didn't have vaccines yet. There was rolling lockdowns, things like that. It was a pretty difficult time for everybody, really. But that really leads me to my first question, which is, why did you think that was the right moment to raise your hand for elected office? And why the heck would you get involved in politics at that moment when it was such a difficult time for politicians to actually manage the province, the city, the country, whatever it is?
Well, thanks, Teresa. That's a good question. And first off, for anyone out there watching or listening, Cambridge is the backdrop for Gilead in the TV show The Handmaid's Tale. So I was in university overseas in Europe, and I still have friends that reach out to me and they say, "Where do you live?" And I say, "Well, we live in the dystopian future of Gilead." So if you watch Handmaid's Tale, the scenes with the river, the church spires, the old cobblestone squares, that's actually Cambridge, Ontario. And have no fear, it's not actually an Orwellian or dystopian future. It's a beautiful space, as the show clearly indicates. So why did I get involved in politics in Cambridge? I was a Banting postdoctoral fellow teaching politics at Wilfrid Laurier University in the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo, Ontario. My family and I were putting down roots in Cambridge. We had looked for places to live all around Ontario, and we found the rivers of Cambridge, the spires, the history of the city, the architecture, and thought, this is it. This is our new forever home. My son came along, and I thought, okay, I have to stop asking, what should someone do to make the world a better place? And I should start asking, what can I do? And so moving from the academic world, where you write a lot of papers and don't see many results translated into concrete action in the political sphere, to the more engaged political zone of pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, listening to people's concerns, trying to figure out how to take the emotional sentiment that residents feel and translate that into actionable, substantive public policy. That was the jump I decided to make. And COVID was, as you mentioned, it was a very challenging time. We're all still feeling the aftershocks of that pandemic. People were down, but I always think that's the time when you have to help pick people up. You have to come with energy, with enthusiasm, with positivity. You always have to find that silver lining in a challenging situation to engage people and show them a brighter future as possible. And that's what I try to translate into my own campaign and into my ideas when I was at Doorsteps. So I just looked at Cambridge and thought, I can use the skills I have to help make my home a better, more resilient, more forward-thinking city. So I never actually planned on becoming a politician. I always thought I would stay in the halls of academia, writing papers and teaching, but I just felt I had something meaningful to contribute to Cambridge at a time when the city could really use some thoughtful leadership. So I threw my hat in the ring. It was the longest by-election, the longest election in the history of Cambridge, because it was actually delayed because of the pandemic. So I was running for a part-time political office for almost a year, is how long that election dragged out. But in the end, I won. That was 6 years ago. And 4 years ago, I was reelected as Ward 7 councillor in the city of Cambridge with about 69.6% of the vote.
I wanted to talk about that because obviously preparing for this, I looked up your electoral record and I saw that number and went, wow, that's pretty good. And obviously there's an incumbency factor that does help people out, but I think you don't get a number that high unless people really approve of what you're doing and see something in the vision that you're offering. So before we get on to the next job you're applying for, I do want to talk about that period because, you've been elected for 6 years now. You have done a lot of work on council. You focused on a lot of issues that I care about, that I think a lot of people care about: housing, accessibility, bringing more opportunity to young people, which is something I focus on a lot of. when you look back at this term and also your first sort of half term, what are you most proud of that you got done?
I wouldn't say there's one thing in particular that I'm most proud of. I'm proud to have the opportunity to represent constituents in a manner that they felt was deserving of another term. It's very rare to have the opportunity to help so many different groups of people simultaneously. So I'd say I take pride in hopefully performing my role to the best expectations of the electorate. So as you mentioned, I've passed motions at Cambridge City Council in terms of novel forms of housing and affordable housing, from tiny homes to the concept of housing over parking, environmental initiatives relating to road salt, charging stations, climate change, employment opportunities for young people. I recently passed a motion using the city as a hub to collect a wide variety of youth employment resources to direct youth to city sites to make job hunting easier in a very challenging moment for Canada's youth. And seniors, I also started a program, helped coordinate a program so that they could have their sidewalks and driveway envelopes shoveled if they were physically unable, and persons that had mental or physical issues could also apply to this program, so they didn't get ticketed by bylaw, and the sidewalk is actually accessible. They can get out of their home in the winter. And there's a variety of other motions I've passed relating to transportation, democracy, and I think the crux of all of them just comes from listening to people at doorsteps, understanding no matter who someone is, their background, their age, their culture, their level of education, everyone's concerns are valid. And your job as a counselor is to listen to everyone and hear the emotion in someone's voice and in their concerns, but to ask yourself, is this something that could be translated into public policy to make a better ward and a better city for everyone? And when the answer is yes, then you're incumbent to do that, to push that forward. So that's where the kind of crux of most of my motions have come from. So knowing that those efforts over the past 6 years have added up in a variety of ways to help people, I think that's something I'm proud of. And also just to let people know that if you are honest, if you're transparent, I've never made a promise to any single constituent other than I will listen to you and I'll work as hard as I can to fulfill what you want, but it might not be possible. And so I'm also the first, I think, person to tell someone when they bring an idea to me, I will be honest and say that's just not doable. Like, hate to get you down on this one, but that's just not feasible for reasons X, Y, Z. And ultimately, I think that's why people have come to respect that attitude. I think the worst thing you can do if you're running for office, and you see a lot of new people running for office that I think feel pressure to say, I want everyone to like me, I want votes. So whenever someone brings me an issue, I have to tell them I agree, I'm going to fight for it. And no, I'd say, no, take the opposite stance. The worst thing you can do is promise someone the moon, then get elected, and then recognize there's no way in heck that you're going to come close to fulfilling that promise. Then you've broken trust with constituents, you've kind of sullied your reputation, and that person's experience with you will translate not only to your level of government, but to all levels of government, and increases that apathy out there. So a long-winded answer to your question, but I think I'm just proud of being able to help people by listening to them and translating it into real public policy that's benefited the city.
I really appreciate what you said about not promising things that you can't deliver on and not suggesting things are possible when they're not, because you are right. People do that so that they can get elected, and then they figure, I'll figure it out later, and then maybe it doesn't happen. They hope people forget, that kind of thing. But I think it's so important that you level with people when you run for office, when you do anything. If you're engaging with other people, you should level with them. And I think we'd have much better politics if that's how more people approached it. And I also think politicians get this wrong. I think they think that, voters will turn them down. They won't vote for them if they level with them. And I don't think that's true. I think one thing I'm always saying about voters is I think they look at politicians and see who would make the same decisions and make the same kind of effort in my place that I would. And when you look at it that way, they recognize that people are not perfect, that people are flawed. They would also make mistakes or maybe get things wrong or maybe, come up short. But I think they understand that politicians functionally are human beings as well. and those same things apply. So I think it's a really important point, because I think a lot of people, especially newer people to politics, don't get that about voters, that that is actually the case. And you can be truthful with people. You can level with them about what is possible.
Oh, absolutely. I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doorsteps now over the past 7 years. a part-time politician, because I work full-time jobs as well, right? When you're a city councillor in Cambridge, it's a part-time role. And people have innate BS detectors, basically. I think everyone does, to varying degrees, granted, but people can sense when someone's being inauthentic. And I think that's something that I've always promised myself not to become. Don't promise the moon and become something you're not in order to get somewhere, because if you fail in that task, then you're just kind of, you're a shell of your former self. So ever since I've come into this role, that's the constant mantra I've told myself, like, follow your conscience, be yourself, and if it doesn't work out, you're still strong internally, right? You haven't lost your composition, your disposition. You can be proud of that. And I think people recognize when someone is not telling them the truth as well. Like, as Mark Twain, paraphrasing Mark Twain, if you don't lie, you don't have to remember anything. And so that's why honesty at the doorstep and when you're in office is essential, because eventually you will get tangled up in your own web. And then that's when people will break trust with you. They'll lose faith. You probably won't get reelected, but then the whole system itself is tarnished. So like you mentioned, just being honest with people, transparent, telling them the truth, even when they don't like it. Yeah, sure, you might get some doors slammed in your face once in a while, but overall, people get it, and I think they respect it. And I think whether it's politics or just everyday interactions with friends, family, and people in our society, we want people to tell us the truth, and we deal with it when it's something we don't like.
I appreciate that as a former political staffer too, because it applies to people behind the scenes as well. Like, if you go in with a set of values and you stay true to that value, regardless of what else is going around you, who's in your ear, all those kinds of things, it's important to leave politics the same way you came in, with the same values you came in. Like, obviously people grow and change and all that, but you want to come out with the same values without feeling like you're, as you said, a shell of yourself when you're coming out on the other end. I think that's just so important.
Yeah, especially now, because things are so heated, right? And so I think as the temperature escalates, there's a natural reaction. And sometimes you might have trolls online. You might have someone that does something to you to try and, either they're kind of crazy or they try and elicit a certain behavior from you to kind of paint you into a corner. And you have to just maintain your composure. And it's that old expression, right? Staring into the abyss. Like, be careful when fighting monsters, lest ye become a monster. Because when you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. And I think about that a lot. And so whenever, someone gets you, you want to get them back. You want your revenge or comeuppance in politics and in life. Like, take a breath and say no. Because if you mimic the behavior that you loathe, or if you copy the actions of something you find reprehensible, you become as bad as the thing you're fighting against. So you have to take that higher road, take a breath, and you just have to trust in the good, common decency of people, that they'll recognize that and respect it in the end.
You're hitting on my core beliefs here, because this is something as well. I'm obviously from the party politics side of things, and I always bring up, like, what's the point of us doing any of this if we become what we oppose, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are any of us here if that's what we're doing? I do want to talk about the current race that you're running for. So, when registration opened for the municipal elections May 1st, you were one of the first people to file your nomination papers, this time for the position of mayor instead of councillor. So I wanted to know, after 6 years on council, what's left to do? What's left for you to accomplish on behalf of Cambridge that you want to become the mayor to do so?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is, I was first in on the first day, because running for mayor is something people have asked me about almost every day for the past 4 years. So I would go to like Costco and Kitchener, and some random person would ask me to, pass the olive oil down from a high shelf. And while doing something, oh, are you going to run for mayor? You should run for mayor. By the way, thank you. So it's definitely been on my mind, and it's something I felt called to do, because I think Cambridge is at quite a pivotal moment in its history. So the town has incredible potential, right? Like, we're nestled on the largest highway in Canada and debatably North America. We have beautiful rivers flowing through us. We have a unique geography and topography with our 3 cores, Galt, Preston, Hespeler, and 4 cores if you include Blair as well. And we see a wide variety of industries coming to this part of Ontario. So there's tremendous potential, I think, to be more forward-thinking, to be more collaborative, to embrace the economic, social, and infrastructural changes that are sweeping North America and Ontario. My mentality has always been to think of change as something that is inevitable in our own lives and in cities. And cities are dynamic, fluxing beasts. So you have to be able to listen carefully to experts around you, to see how the tea leaves are changing in municipalities that are similar, and to act with the best economic, social, and safety interests of your residents in mind, to ensure that whatever change is coming, you're prepared for it, you're ready for it, you can embrace it, and you can use it to your advantage. Because if you don't, changes tend to get implemented no matter what, but it's in a broken, piecemeal fashion that doesn't lead to a connected, collaborative, fully operable or properly functioning municipality. So here, building a city where families can afford to put down roots, seniors and older adults can age with grace and dignity, and our children know that when they age, they have a viable economic future for career growth and social future to raise a family. So I think when you're an elected official, granted, like the taxpayers of today matter, but ultimately your decisions will echo down, and it will be our kids that will feel the results of them. So you always have to be thinking ahead to say, how will what we do today impact taxpayers today, next week, but also how will my kids react to this 5, 10, 15 years down the line? And keep that in mind if you want to build a viable, prosperous city where people are excited to visit and stay and live.
So something I want to talk about, which has been, pretty much it's been one of the big hot button issues in municipal politics over the last couple of years. And this is the province. One, the province has been reshaping the municipal landscape for a while in a lot of different ways, at the regional level, at the city level, all kinds of stuff. But the big one, I would say, is probably the strong mayor powers. So this is something that was rolled out to a few different municipalities, those who tended to be buddies of the current premier, and then got rolled out to more municipalities. Cambridge was one of them. So essentially, for those who don't know, of course, for our listeners, it's a top-down, it allows a top-down powers where the mayor can basically ignore the elected council in terms of like the budget and other things, rejecting amendments from councillors, all kinds of stuff. And it gives them more of an American style power over what the city does, compared to our typical process where they are just one vote on a council and have to, marshal support for their ideas and that kind of thing. We have seen, the Toronto Star did a study on it and saw that I think it was meant to introduce new levers for local governments to build housing. That was really the marketing of it. But we have seen from the Toronto Star report that I think it's less than 1% of the time it's been used for that purpose. And actually more often mayors have used it to block new housing from being built, or to use it for, little pet projects like installing a sign here or something like that. So it hasn't actually had the intended purpose of it used so far, and it actually has been detrimental in a number of ways. If you're elected mayor, just given your conversation earlier about listening to people and things like that, if you were elected mayor, would you continue using these powers? If you did, how would you use them, and how would you make this more of a collaborative council going forward?
I think leadership is not about having more power and more control. Leadership is about bringing other people along with you. And you typically don't do that, by force or with a bludgeon or with a threat. You bring people along with you by working with them, listening to them, and ensuring that their values and goals are aligned with yours, so that everyone's working together, everyone's paddling in the same direction, because there are so many different variables and things in place in a municipality. So leadership isn't about who is the strongest. Leadership is about who is the most collaborative that can get everyone to move in the same direction. Because it's a huge ship, and if you want to change directions, it's all hands on deck. So as a great philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's the same with strong mayor powers, right? So you need a leader in that case that understands that having that power and having the legislative or legalistic tools to enact it doesn't mean it should be used. It should be used only in the most extraneous emergency situation you can imagine. And so when it comes to a municipal council, like the electorate, they elect a mayor for sure. But in Cambridge, they also elect 8 other city councillors, and those councillors are elected to represent their own wards and the voices of their constituents. So using strong mayor powers also ignores not only your own city council, but the voices of the constituents that are relying on their own ward councillor to represent them. So my approach is always to work more collaboratively, to build consensus, to make sure that even when someone's voices aren't heard, even when someone's voices aren't, you're not in agreement with them, at least they know they're heard. You can work with them. So we can come to a disagreement, but at least I know, well, that person was listening to me. They heard me out. We ultimately don't disagree, but I don't feel disrespected in any way. And so the strongest decisions are ones that are made together through collaboration, through consensus. And we know that in municipalities. But I think one of the other dangers of strong mayor powers is also, like, if you want to be an effective mayor, in my mind, you need to ensure that your council's on board and that you are being listened to and that your voice is valued and your position around the council horseshoe is respected. So one of the dangers of strong mayor powers in Cambridge and in all municipalities that are granted this is that you can risk creating rifts on your own council that will translate into other decisions and other situations where strong mayor powers may not even be enacted. So everyone knows, like, workplace culture is extremely important. So strong mayor powers risks upending that, because anyone who's ever worked anywhere knows that if you don't feel respected by your manager, or like you're being listened to, or that your work makes a difference, or that your actions will be translated into something tangible that helps the organization, well, what's the point? You become frustrated. So I think there's also that psychological and emotional challenge to strong mayor powers that we're seeing across a lot of municipalities now. And the Toronto Star report, I think you referenced it, showed that strong mayor powers were supposed to come in to translate into housing and provincial priorities. Really, they were used primarily to reorganize the internal corporate structure of municipalities. And that risks creating substantial challenges with internal culture of cities. If people suddenly have their roles switched, if there's no engagement of how the process is going to happen and when and how it's going to affect someone's job and reporting structure and so on and so forth, that can create real damage within cities that can last a very long time. So my response to strong mayor powers, they don't use them unless it's absolutely 100% necessary. And if you have to, people understand the reasons for it, and they can still create consensus and collaboration with you in the future going forward. It shouldn't be an emotional rift.
So that also brings us to the question of the budget. So, everybody knows the political saying that show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities. And you've talked a lot about focusing on the essentials and maybe leaving off some of the nice to haves, just given the fiscal picture that, all municipalities face in general, but particularly at this moment as there's, cuts across the board. What can voters expect from the city budget if you're elected mayor?
So budgets are incredibly complex. That's for sure. That they're usually, every municipality is like a phone book that they produce full of numbers and initiatives. But you can sum it all up by saying a budget is really a statement of a city's values. What does a city find most important? And how does it take that all important tax dollar from a resident to translate into a fully operable home and community for everyone? So I think every budget decision has to be made, especially today, every budget decision has to be made through the lens of affordability. How does this dollar that we're taking from a taxpayer, how are we spending it? How does that translate into a more affordable city? And how does it convey to that resident that their dollars are being used in a way that creates real value, a real return on the investment, you could say, for our residents? So I think City Hall in Cambridge can function a bit more effectively by ensuring that there's no duplication of services, spending more efficiently on projects, and also how to allocate its money in terms of its operations, and showing its residents very transparently how those tax dollars go into creating real value down the line. So focusing on what residents matters most, like there's obviously roads, potholes, infrastructure, there's housing, cleaner downtown cores, more efficient services, and of course, more transparency in how budget dollars are allocated, and how spending operates within the city as well, right? Are there consultants being hired? Why? For what purpose? Could city staff have done those initiatives? I think there can be a lot of elimination of duplication, a lot of efficiency, and a lot of transparency in our budget, and that could definitely be improved. And of course, the all-important issue as well is make sure that capital projects, things you're building in the community to make it better, ensure that it creates value by helping the whole community, right? So there should never be millions and millions of dollars spent on a very kind of niche project or pet project that only benefits a small group of people or a very small area. Like you can get just probably more value and spend 25% as much by creating small projects across the city in neighborhoods that are relatively cheap to build from a capital perspective and cheap to operate from an operations perspective. So think of a pickleball court, a basketball court, a community garden. Those don't have to break the bank, and they're relatively easy to maintain. They can go into a variety of different neighborhoods. They can pull communities together, and it doesn't have to be something that basically holds the taxpayers of a city to account for decades to come. So that's the type of budget I would really focus on, is just making sure that at the end of the day, residents should know that they work extremely hard for their money. Of course, the city hall that they send their tax dollars to respects that, and City Hall will take as good care of their hard-earned money as they have.
I want to talk about that piece of return on investment, because I think we're entering a moment where, like just as before we got on, there was Mark Carney's going to go on to announce that 24 Sussex is going to be rebuilt through a private fundraising process. And 24 Sussex is like pretty much the best example of like a decline in interest in paying for things that government should pay for, because it is the Prime Minister's residence. We can debate whether that should exist, and maybe you could have moved to Stornoway, blah blah blah, all those things. But it's a larger conversation about turns out we need tax dollars to pay for government resources, and government actually doesn't operate like a business. There are things that you invest in that do not put money back into government coffers, whether it's the city level, the province, the federal government. And that's okay. Those things need to be spent because government is the only body that is going to invest in those things on behalf of people and the taxpayers who pay for it. So I wanted to ask, how would you measure the city's return on investment on non-revenue generating spending? I'm thinking of, social infrastructure. You mentioned basketball courts, parks, things like that, physical infrastructure. How do you measure that return on investment?
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, government is not a business, right? So it's always a challenge whenever, I'm fully in support of our chamber, our small businesses, our medium, large-sized businesses, and it takes an incredible amount of skill and acumen to succeed in any level of business, especially recently, right? From the pandemic to now the situation with President Trump down south and his kind of unpredictable and unprecedented economic turmoil that he's created. So that being said, being good at business does not necessarily translate into being good at governing, and vice versa. Just like being a great prime minister may not mean that you're going to become a great CEO, right? It takes a skill set of thinking very critically, listening to experts, using historical data to try and predict future trends, not acting emotionally, just being calm, clear-headed, rational. And a government cannot and probably should not generate revenue off of things like a school or a park or a library, or those communal spaces that should be open to anyone regardless of their level of income, right? Like a city is a dynamic beast, but there are things that just don't make money, and they're there because they're an essential public good. So generating value, that's what ROI should, again, going back, kind of touching on the last question, residents should feel that they get a return on their investment when they know their tax dollars are being spent to maintain that piece of public social infrastructure that generates value for the community. And it's tough to measure. You can use data where possible, but this is where I think listening to residents comes in really handy. Trying to find ways, whether it's surveys, whether it's door knocking, whether it's just assessing the mood of what's going on in the media or at council meetings, but trying to ensure that residents know that they are getting a return on their investment through their tax dollars by ensuring that those parks, those schools, those libraries, the rivers, the basketball courts, that they ultimately add up to create a more positive, more engaging, happier, more exciting city. And I think when those things start to decline, right, you see cracks in those pieces of social infrastructure, they start to decay. That's really where you feel that I think residents feel like they're losing value. And it's very prominent. People have a sixth sense. They kind of know, is my community on the up or the down? And return on the investment for a taxpayer is when they know overall their tax dollars are going to creating that social value that keeps the city energized and engaged and keeps residents and tourists always wanting to come back home again.
So another piece of this sort of budgetary puzzle is the fact, again, I mentioned earlier that municipalities don't have a lot of money. They never have. That's how we've structured our system.
Yeah.
And, they're not able to operate deficits, things like that. Other levels of government have a lot more levers at their disposal in terms of taxes that they can apply to things, and in terms of, how much deficit and debt they can go into. Municipalities also have the smallest budget, obviously, of the various levels of government, and
Yep.
they lack, other than property taxes, there's largely very few levers to pay for things like maintenance and also growth, which a city like Cambridge, which is growing, needs to be able to pay for that growth. How would you build relationships with the other levels of government to ensure Cambridge gets its fair share of funding and services going forward?
Well, the best approach is you have to build these relationships before you need them, right? Because if everyone knows, if someone comes to you for the very first time asking you for something, especially money, you're automatically going to be somewhat skeptical. So embracing that collaborative nature from the very outset. So engaging with Cambridge is within a two-tiered municipality, the municipality of Cambridge and the region of Waterloo, and there's the province and there's the federal government. Engaging with all of those jurisdictions as collaborators from the get-go, so they know that if it is going to be a win for Cambridge, it's going to be a win for the region, a win for the province, a win for the federal government. And I think the issues that we're facing today, from homelessness to mental health and addictions to housing to environmental challenges, from microplastics to climate change, no one jurisdiction can do it alone. They're all entangled together and they all have an essential role to play. So making sure that your council understands that, your public understands that, that all levels of government and the representatives that you're working with understand that, that's going to lead, I think, to a more kind of conducive relationship. There's always been an understanding since I moved to Cambridge and within the region that Cambridge has never quite gotten its fair share from the region. I don't always agree with that, maybe in some circumstances, but not always. But again, right now, looking at how challenged every level of government is financially and looking at the scope of the entangled challenges we're all facing, I don't think Cambridge will get ahead by slamming its fist on the table and saying, give me mine, we deserve X, Y, Z. I think it'll be a much more positive relationship for all levels of government by saying, here's the historical pathway of Cambridge, here's how we got here, here's how, if Cambridge gets X, Y, Z, it's going to benefit the region, the province, the feds, and how this will all combine into reaching that shared goal together. I think Cambridge will, quote unquote, get what it deserves in that sense, but also other governments will as well. And everyone will ultimately feel like they've benefited from that partnership instead of saying, oh, zero-sum game. If I give a piece of pie to Cambridge, I'm going to lose mine. It's like, no, we need what's called a positive sum game, where a win for Cambridge is a win for the region and the province and the feds. And I think we can get there. And as we're seeing from the challenges down south, sometimes the greater the scope of the problem, the more that can fuel collaboration that is mutually beneficial. It just requires creative problem solving and leaders that are willing to think a little outside the box, but engage each other collaboratively in ways that maybe not have been attempted before, but in ways that are reasonable, rational, calm, and give their constituents confidence that the actions they're taking will lead to a better tomorrow. So that's how I as mayor, I would approach those relationships with the other levels of government.
So something I want to talk about now, we've mentioned affordability a little bit, we've mentioned housing a little bit. I think these are, obviously the two twin issues of our time. They have been for, at least the 10 years since I've left the Ministry of Housing provincially as well. This is something that's on top of mind for everybody. It also brings up the question about like the character of a place where people live. Cambridge has a lot of heritage properties within it. But I also think, most communities think, people who live in communities go, I moved here or I was born here or whatever it is, and I really like the way this place feels, so I don't want that to change. But at the same time, you have seniors now who go, well, I want my millennial kids or my now Gen Z kids to be able to afford to live in the communities they grew up in, and that requires actually building new housing, and maybe it's multi-resident housing and all that kind of stuff, which maybe changes the character. So, rightly or wrongly, people feel this way about these issues. And in a community growing as fast as Cambridge, you kind of have to grapple with what is the right balance on these fronts. How can we make sure that we are growing, that we're building housing that families can actually afford, while also keeping Cambridge, the way it is in a sense of feeling and placemaking and having people feel that this is still the Cambridge they know and love and want to stay in for their lives. How would you balance those demands?
And this is something I think affecting lots of municipalities around Ontario, right? The pressures of growth and development versus maintaining that kind of the heritage or old town feel. And I don't necessarily think that the two are opposed to one another or in conflict, or that they're mutually exclusive. I think we can definitely add more housing while still maintaining that unique feel that makes a city or makes Cambridge Cambridge. So we need more housing across the entire housing continuum, from supportive, transitional, affordable, all the way up to single detached. Like we need more housing, period. Like we shouldn't have a scenario where young working families have to move outside of the city just to afford a home. I think that we should also never lose sight of why people do move here in the first place. We have beautiful rivers, we have charming cores, we have a particular vibe that is not necessarily that of a downtown metropolitan city, right? We're not New York. But one of the things I think we have to remember is change is inevitable, as we discussed. And frequently you do have people that say, I'm not opposed to change, but I don't want you to make any changes. And I think we have to ensure that as those changes come, because we know they will, that they're thoughtful. So we need growth that is thoughtful. We need gentle density that respects the character of neighborhoods, while also understanding that if your home was built 50, 60, 70 years ago, even 30 years ago, the market has changed, the materials have changed, the zoning has changed. There will be differences, but difference doesn't necessarily mean something that is conflictual. Small differences in neighborhoods create contrast, and that's what creates a dynamic kind of fun city. So if you look at, for example, the main street of Galt, everyone uses the main street of Galt as a great example of heritage, and it is. There's a heritage conservation district on that street. It's been there since 1985, I think. But it's not one uniform historical street. That street in Galt is divided up into actually different styles of architecture that were put in over many different decades. There's a scope of about 80 years of different forms of architecture, style, material, and it's the contrast in that forms a really great space. And I know we can accomplish that as a city. And I think what we would have to do is looking at housing. A lot of the issue is the approvals do get caught up in certain amounts of red tape, and sometimes staff aren't available because they are basically at max capacity. So ensuring there is appropriate level of planning and staff that work in housing to ensure development approvals can get forward in a reasonable time. Using city-owned land for affordable housing is something that I've always been a fan of. When a city has land that it can use for housing, it can also set the terms and conditions of what goes into that space. So I think that's something the City of Cambridge could be using a lot more effectively, and just making sure growth is actually supported by the infrastructure, right? We're seeing lots of infrastructure gaps appearing around Ontario where what was built, now there's no money to pay for it, but we're building more. How's it going to work? So again, that ties back to being collaborative with other levels of government to ensure that the funding is there so that whatever is built, we know we're going to have the proper infrastructure in place to be able to fund that, so it doesn't fall on the backs of taxpayers. But I think, it's a tough tightrope to walk, right? Because people don't want their fields, farm fields, swallowed up by suburban homes spreading out. And sometimes those exact same people might say, well, I don't want my city to grow up either. And I think, we don't have to build out and consume farmland if we have that thoughtful, gentle density within our cores that can at least maintain the city feel, provide walkability and economic development to the downtown cores of our city that need it, while still keeping that same sense of place and of Cambridge and of home. And just to end on this, I think, what makes Cambridge Cambridge is not one building or one structure or even the river. It's the feeling of community people have when they live here. And it's the events we have. It's the markets that form. It's the social vibe of the city. And I think we just need to understand that whatever changes we bring in, we maintain that same semblance of community, excitement, and we celebrate it. And that's going to make a strong, vibrant Cambridge moving forward.
You mentioned a lot of really important things there. So I live in Midtown Toronto now, and there's supposedly 9 buildings, towers going up on my block alone. We'll see
Oh,
where the funding ends up, because
yeah.
the market has been a bit shaky since all these projects started. But my concern has never been the number of people moving in. It's been, making sure we're resourcing for the area, because our local grocery store, even before all this, often the lettuce wall was empty, and I was like, "What is this?" But like, you have to make sure there's enough grocery stores, that there's enough doctors, there's enough
Yeah.
things around that can actually support the populations. Even just, municipalities, the concern is always sewer hookups and things like that. All of that is important. But I also think about, I've often thought Cambridge is very similar to the town I grew up in, which is Newmarket, Ontario, and
Ah,
another heritage community, founded in the 1800s. Responsible government, all these kinds of things are very important to that community. Beautiful main street as well, very similar to Gulf, and located to a body of water as well. And when I was growing up, it was fine, but they've really embraced the heritage of the downtown while allowing growth to build up around it. They've got, some rapid bus lanes that go down in the same area. And Newmarket is not a big land area. It's a postage stamp. There's only, you have to build up at this point if you're going to do anything. But it's also located next to the Holland Marsh. So you're talking about farmland again. In order to protect that farmland, which feeds the vast majority of this country, you
mhm.
actually have to build up the communities around it with, as you're talking about, gentle density and things like that. And I think what you're saying about the culture is so important. Invest in the culture so the place still feels like itself while you're building up and welcoming more people in. And I think Newmarket's doing it. I think what you're talking about
Mhm.
can really work for Cambridge. And it's not about how do we keep people out, it's about how do we make sure that people can join in on what we already have here and strengthen what we already have here. So,
Yeah.
I'm just agreeing with you.
No, well, and small world, because I grew up in Tottenham, Ontario, so just down
Oh, there
Highway
you go.
9. So Newmarket was the big city. That was our big city growing up. We drive in, right? Go see a movie at the Film Factory, right?
Yeah. Oh, I
Newmarket
miss the
Mall.
Film
I
Factory. I
know.
miss it so much.
Yeah, it was
That was
good.
definitely my first theater I went to. It was so good. That's a whole other podcast we could. But
Well, well, just to quickly like piggyback on what you were talking about, people around Cambridge, myself included, frequently wish we could have vibrant cores again. And again, Cambridge is a unique beast because it has 3 kind of 4 cores, while most cities just have 1. You have your core, and then you have your industrial kind of lands in one pocket outside of that, your suburban homes. So Cambridge is it's a challenge. We have 3 cores, and so how do you revitalize cores to get back to the point where people kind of have this nostalgic memory of the cores of Galt, Crescent, Hespeler 50 years ago, 40 years ago, where it was vibrant, full of people, full of restaurants. And that's because there were people there, right? You had industries along the river, like woolen mills, industrial, iron, and it pulled thousands of people down to the cores during the day. And so that was kind of your hotspot. And through economic transitions globally and nationally, those industries dried up, right? And now there's nothing pulling people to the river every day anymore. So I think the answer is we need housing. We need more density in our cores, respectable density. Some would call it a bowl effect, where you can keep density low in kind of the classic main street, but the farther you go, the higher up you can build, so that you have enough people, you have walkability, so that if someone says, hey, I need to get groceries, I need to get some dry cleaning, I want to go to a restaurant, if it's within a 15-minute walk, they'll do it. If it's a 20-minute to a 30-minute walk, they're getting in their car and they're going to go to Walmart, right? So ensuring that we have that walkability and that gentle density and thoughtful growth in our downtown cores that allow us to revitalize it by giving people a space to walk to and live, rather than getting in their car and driving out. I think that is essential, and also reminding all of our other residents, once that trend starts, hey, instead of driving to Walmart, drive downtown, because there's really cool stuff and you're supporting local. It's kind of that 2-pronged approach. It's living in our cores again by going up, not consuming the farmland, and also reminding the rest of our residents, hey, there's a great communal social space that is the heart of Cambridge, or 3 hearts, 3.5 if you include Blair, just because Blair is smaller per capita. It's gorgeous, but it is smaller. I think that's the way that we're going to revitalize our cores.
Well, and this is what they've discovered in Newmarket as well. I played hockey growing up. There's a community center downtown where there was a very old rink, excellent fries, of course, and these old barn rinks. But
Yep.
they've turned that whole area into something called Riverwalk Commons. So there is a river that goes all around downtown Newmarket. It goes into Fairy Lake, but they have this communal space now where people can meet. So Connor McDavid was from Newmarket. So when the Oilers were on their cup run, that's where everybody gathered with their lawn chairs, and they had a big screen set up. Having those places that people can come together and then fan out in the downtown core is really essential to helping those businesses as well, right? Like if people aren't coming there, like you're talking about, if you're going to get in your car to go to Walmart instead on the big box stores on the outsides of the city, you're not coming downtown. So I think those meeting places are essential as well as part of building that up.
Yep, absolutely. And I know that space because I used to drive from Cambridge, pick up my dad in Tottenham because he was getting sick. He has dementia, unfortunately, so he couldn't drive. And then I would take him to Newmarket Hospital, get his scans and his tests, and then we go out for, we go to Main Street in Newmarket. We go for breakfast, we go sit by the river. And so those changes you're talking about, it makes complete sense. And the transition and the changes that Newmarket has experienced, it's quite like a great example of what happens when you understand change is coming, but you embrace it and you use it to highlight the best underlying capabilities of a city. So aside from the loss of the film factory, I do approve of the changes in downtown.
That is the one adjustment they made there that I don't love, but I think that kind of happened before all that.
Yeah.
And mentioning the hospital too, that is a regional hospital, but it is situated right by the downtown. So, I had another friend who their parent had to go to that hospital, and I brought up Four Seasons Chinese food, which has been there since, before I moved to Newmarket in 1988 when I was a 2-year-old. And I still bring it up to people like, if you're at the hospital, treat yourself to lunch and go get the best Chinese food that I have ever had in my life. But there's just connection points. Anyways, I do want to talk about, we can talk about how great the communities are when you do these things, but there's also people who are left out of community regularly, even in these open spaces, right? And that is the homeless population. So when I was working at the Ministry of Housing, we were really focused on investing in community supports, whether it was supportive housing. So you'd have wraparound supports for people because, of course, housing is essential to getting people back on their feet, but then you need to provide the other supports to help them do that. We had a program called Chippy, which invested heavily in municipalities and helped local service managers actually figure out what the best solutions were for their community as opposed to a top-down approach. We've seen a complete reversal of this over the last 10 years, and we've seen the homeless population rise. I think it's linked personally. But the current mayor has really run on an enforcement first model where addressing mental health, addictions issues, and homelessness are something that involves police, is something that perhaps involves jail time, involves, forced treatment, things like that don't account for what's effective, that don't account for what people need. And I checked out the data from the region of Waterloo, and the number of people without shelter in the region, and of course this is all the municipalities in the region, but people without shelter in the region has actually doubled since the mayor was last elected as mayor. How would you fix this response? Because I think it's a failed response to these serious issues, and it seems to me to be demanding a different approach.
Well, as you mentioned, if we start criminalizing homelessness or mental health issues, then I think that's the wrong direction. And that's what studies consistently show. Peer-reviewed studies, as well as experts working in the field, say that is the wrong approach. You need to treat this as not a political problem. It's not a legal problem. It's a health problem. It's a health crisis. So the first thing I think we can admit is what we're doing today is not working. As you mentioned, we need to start taking a different approach. And it's very challenging because you need to create a city where all of your residents feel safe, right? And I hear it at doorsteps a lot. Families feel uncomfortable walking downtown in certain areas of Galt with kids, especially because they don't know what's going to happen. They see a lot of homelessness. There's even some sharps or some needles in some playgrounds. But on the other hand, we have to understand that people experiencing homelessness right now are our residents, and we need to do our best to help them. So squaring that circle is definitely a challenge, and we're certainly not the only municipality that's experiencing it. But I think one of the things that Cambridge specifically can do is to be far more proactive in listening to our local experts, social services, healthcare providers, paramedics and first responders, persons in the field, and even persons with lived experience, listening to people experiencing homelessness, actually asking, what can we do to make this situation better? I think one of the first things I would do as mayor is create a task force or a roundtable of executive directors and experts who work in homelessness in Cambridge and Waterloo region. Say, what can the city do? I think that's essential. These have to be decisions that are made not through emotion, not based on what's happened in other countries or other communities, but it has to be based on evidence. And it has to be based on that lived experience of people working in the field and experiencing these issues. What can our city do better? And we do have local voices that want to provide that guidance and that assistance, but they don't feel, I think, like they're acknowledged in the city. I think the recent report by the YWCA of Cambridge called Cambridge a service desert, because sometimes organizations don't feel like there is sufficient support from leadership or funding or space. And there's clearly a widespread need. Like, there is a crisis where shelter beds, if we're talking about homelessness, they're at capacity. I know the YWCA operates the only women's shelter in Cambridge and one of the very few in Waterloo region. It was at about 95% capacity, and they had to turn away, I think, over 150 women, even in the winter, just because they didn't have the space. So we know there's a crisis. We know we can, as a municipality, play a role, even though the region of Waterloo maintains jurisdictional control over homelessness housing. We can definitely create an avenue where leaders, people in the field, know that they can come forward with actions, with answers to this, and that the city will work proactively with them as partners to do our best to engage it, even within our limited jurisdictional capabilities. So we need to shape those policies that work locally by listening to our local experts. I think we can do a much better job of that.
Well, I think that's so essential because, municipalities, they don't get to decide how much money they have to spend on these things. And largely these are partnerships with other levels of government to introduce new shelter space and things like that. But that relationship with social service providers is so important. In the other hat you wear, you're a director of United Way, so you do have some background in this space and have a sense of how these organizations work. What could the next mayor of Cambridge do to actually be helpful on that front and build those relationships so there's, with the limited funds that are available, there's more bang for your buck on the social services front?
It's a big question, and it's interesting kind of having worn those two hats, right? Like, working in social services, I was a senior director at United Way, so all across Waterloo region, helping organizations try to deal with homelessness, housing, mental health, food insecurity. And on the other hand, kind of wearing the more policy-oriented hat as a city councillor. So you see how important the partnerships are between municipalities and all of these charities and nonprofits that are out there doing extremely valuable work. And like municipalities, social services, nonprofits are being hit by funding challenges right now, right? Like United Way and a variety of different organizations depend on donors for their funding. And if there's no funding, then there's no staff. If there's no staff or supplies, well, then there's no help. Where do people go? They go back out on the streets or deeper into the bush, depending on the circumstance. So I think one of the things the city really can do is ensure that there is that, again, that open space for our local experts to feel comfortable that if they raise an issue with the city, that their voice will be heard, that actions will be taken, that the city can work collaboratively with our different nonprofits, social services, charities, agents working out in the field to actually create new policies that are bottom up, while maybe being enforced or enacted from the top down by the city. It's something I don't think has happened too much in the past. Because I do know there are a lot of agencies and social services out there that say, we want to try X, Y, Z, but we're just not getting the support. And we think this will really help people. So I think if what we're doing isn't working and our nonprofits, social services have ideas as to how we can try to ameliorate or reduce this horrible crisis we're seeing, if it's, again, sensical, rational, if it's inexpensive, or at least if clear value for the spending of taxpayer dollars on those initiatives can be demonstrated, and if it doesn't exacerbate those stigmas, or it doesn't exacerbate those misunderstandings around criminalizing homelessness and forced treatment and all of those things that are not backed up by research or by the accounts of experts. Well, do what experts say that we should, because they are the experts, and let's give it a shot if it makes sense. But to not react to homelessness with any stigmas or any assumptions or any emotions, right? Don't just believe what you read on Facebook. Go to the people that actually have spent their lives and decades dealing with this crisis and that might even live in your neighborhood. They probably have some great ideas, and I don't know if they've been listened to or actioned as much as we should as a city. So that's one thing as mayor I would do. Again, one of the first things, get those experts that live in our community that have answers that we haven't tried to the table, and we'll do whatever is possible to try and change the situation on the ground. And I think there are ways we can do that.
So we spent a bit of time talking about, the negatives that are occurring in the city that you have to manage as a mayor and council. But there's also the positive side. There's the side about placemaking and creating a world-class community and what that looks like. And to me, as I already mentioned, I think it's about creating shared spaces for people to enjoy. It brings people together and they have a sense of loyalty to each other and dedication to making things better for each other. I think that's really, really important. You proposed something called the Back to Rivers Plan, and that's to create paths, attract cafes and shops, and develop sports tourism opportunities along the Grand and Speed rivers, which I think is very, very cool. It sounds like something similar I've seen in other communities that have invested in these shared spaces. How did you accomplish this? And, with the caveat of limiting environmental impacts on the watershed, because of course that is an important element of what the rivers do for the city.
So back in, I think it was 2021, I kind of brought the concept of placemaking to City Hall in a more formal capacity. I brought a motion saying, hey, we should do more with placemaking as an actual city initiative, and came forward with a variety of ideas as to how to basically make the city fun. And placemaking, for anyone out there that's unfamiliar with the term, because not everyone is, right? I've knocked on a lot of doors and people say, what's placemaking? And it's creating spaces of free community joy and excitement and activity that really allows a city to showcase its best elements while pulling residents together at little to no cost. And so Back to the Rivers, I think, is really a fantastic placemaking opportunity for Cambridge, because again, we have 3 different major cores, 4 if you count Blair, but Preston, Galt, Hespeler are straddling that river, the Speed and the Grand River. And what do we have as a city that's actually on that river that is exciting, right? So I think we could utilize that river to have more patios to eat and drink. We could have playgrounds like they do in Collingwood. We could have small shops. I always think about in London, and I think there's an example of this in Toronto, using small shipping containers as almost like impromptu markets. It's very cost effective. It's actually very cool. But drawing people back to the rivers, Jacob's Landing and Hespeler is underutilized. I've written about that. If you go down to Galt as well, we do have river paths, but the largest swath of land beside the river in Galt, like what do we do with it? It's a parking lot. Now, granted, we need parking. That's another conversation, and I looked into that, and there should hopefully be a parking garage coming to Galt in the future. But if we really want to go back to the rivers, I think we need to embrace that idea of better bike paths, more activities, more playgrounds. Maybe it's even, those concrete chessboards, ping pong, basketball. Like there's a variety of things you can do straddling the river that pulls people together. And just that sensation of being near water is calming for people of every age. People just all backgrounds, dispositions, walks of life, levels of income. Everyone just loves going back to the river. And even in the river, like we could do more with kayaking, right? With canoeing. There is a very special spot, and I wrote about this in the placemaking motion I brought forward, where you can actually put a small surf wave in near the Cambridge Mill. When I first moved to Cambridge, there was a huge sports tourism competition. It's one of the few places, I think, in Canada you could actually have a fully functioning surf wave in such an urban area. I mean, it's amazing. So you obviously have to consult with the GRCA to make sure everything is environmentally feasible. Of course, First Nations and our Indigenous partners, they would have to be brought in, and for sure to work with them as absolute partners to ensure that any activity that goes in along the river is done with their full consent, and that any benefit that is accrued to the city also goes to First Nations and Indigenous partners as well. But there's a lot of potential there. There's so much excitement we can do along our rivers, and it's just one element of how creating those free spaces, it isn't just a good investment by showing taxpayers are getting value for their dollar, but think about how many tourists would come to Cambridge if instead of a parking lot, there was that playground or that social space to do something, or that small market or that cafe or that patio like we see in other cities. We can do that. I think we just need the initiative, and we need to work with our partners to ensure that we can bring it forward to fruition in the future.
Well, and I think ideas like this, we talk about how people fear change. When you hear something very different from people what experience in their typical experience of the city, they start to question, well, is this feasible, all that kind of stuff. But you mentioned the shipping container. So, in Christchurch, New Zealand, this is something they use regularly because of the earthquake threat. It's something that's very simple to set up as an infrastructure piece. You can create whole markets out of it, and they've done that. But when you're talking about this walk along the river with these opportunities, which include shipping containers, I was actually thinking about Philadelphia. They have I think it's along the Delaware, they have a community like that where they have restaurants and things like that operating out of shipping containers, and it's beautiful. They have string lights everywhere. It looks really nice. It's very hip. It's the cool part of the city that everybody loves to go to. You're next to the water. It's really, really calming. But, there's business opportunities there. There's opportunities for people to enjoy themselves. And it's something that, without a lot of cost or effort, actually does enhance a space that you already make use of. So it's something that, even if you're unfamiliar with it, it's something that we have seen work elsewhere, but also brings a lot of value to the community. I do want to talk about two things because, of course, I have talked too much, so we're running out of time. But two things I want to talk about going forward is
sure.
the LRT project and also data centers, because I think those are going to be two long-term focuses in terms of infrastructure in the community. The LRT is slowly moving along in its process. It's expected, shovels in the ground by 2032, which is still quite a ways away at this point. And the other thing that's been coming up a lot in communities across the country is the idea of data centers. So we already have data centers. Not everybody's aware of that. We have data centers in communities across the country, but the ones that are being proposed now are enormous. I think there's one in the US that Kevin O'Leary's trying to build that's like the size of Manhattan or something like that, which is insane when you think about the size of this, the infrastructure that goes into it, the power it takes to run these things. I think, and I'll allow you to break it into the two, the LRT, but on the data center front, I think the federal and provincial governments are all in on AI, and I think Canadians are largely skeptical of it still, which isn't just about the surface itself, but also the environmental impacts and employment issues and all these kinds of things in your hometown community and what that means for your community. How would you keep the LRT on track? And then with the data centers, what would proposals have to do to actually, meet your stamp of approval to bring something like that to Cambridge?
Yeah, two big questions. I mean, we could talk about each one for an hour in itself. But,
getting some small ones to just cram in here at the end.
I'll be quick. I mean, I'm a supporter of the LRT. When I was doing my postdoc at the City School, and then when I was teaching, university at Laurier, it was in Uptown Waterloo, and you saw the transformative effect the LRT had. And it's unlike anything else, really. It far surpasses buses. When people talk about, put buses in, the fact that you can lay down tracks and give incredible certainty to investors and developers that there's going to be a constant stream of people and things to do. It's not just a train to get people around. It is an unparalleled economic development and social development engine for a community. So I'm a supporter of the LRT, and I think as mayor, we need to ensure that all the pieces are in place so that when those shovels do get in the ground, that Cambridge is ready, that residents know what to expect in terms of any construction delays, that any costs, of course, are going to be borne by the appropriate parties, because Cambridge has paid into the LRT in Kitchener-Waterloo for quite some time, and now we should not be forced to pay extra, let's say, to get that. It has to come, funding has to come from the provincial level, the federal level, so that Cambridge gets its return on investment, right, directly. And so that's why leadership matters. It's for planning, for design, for coordination, for ensuring the city understands the point of the investment. I think that could be conveyed much better going into the future, because it won't just build Cambridge, it'll tie the whole region together, right? And together we are stronger, especially with the very challenging economic climate that we're seeing provincially and nationally and internationally. An LRT isn't just a social economic development engine, it's a community builder for the region as a whole, economically and socially.
And on data centers?
Data centers, yeah. And so they're already here. And so I know Cambridge, I used to speak with the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation and Tony Lamantia, and already in Cambridge, I think there's the OVH1, COER. So there are data centers already operating right now in Cambridge. My concern is if you build a big data center, it can be incredibly energy intensive. You need the electrical grid that can support it. and it can be environmentally disastrous, right? In terms of the land it can consume and the amount of water you might need to actually fuel that data center, because it produces a tremendous amount of heat. So I think a lot of the centers that are already in Cambridge are far smaller. And I know there are data centers where they don't waste water because it's in what's called a closed loop system. So an open loop is where new water comes in, it gets used, it's pumped out. It's like leaving a tap on. Data centers that are smaller that have closed loop systems where you just have the initial injection of water and then it's reused. And that heat, I think in some can actually be captured and reused as energy, almost like a hybrid car. Those are, I think, realities of our current economic climate that we need to consider as a city as those development proposals were brought forward. But I could not support a super Manhattan-sized development center that's going to be deleterious or damaging or possibly dangerous to our water supply, to our electrical grid, and also to the employment prospects of the city, right? Because as a mayor, you want industries that are going to bring lots of jobs, which involve lots of hands-on work for your population. And I don't think those translate as well with those large-scale data centers you're talking about. So you have to always take the proposal as it comes to you. You have to weigh it carefully, cautiously, work with your staff that are experts in this. But I could not support something that would be environmentally, socially, and economically dangerous for the city in terms of those large Kevin O'Leary-style Manhattan data centers.
So just before we go, local voters are going to be going to the polls October 26th of this year, which is me reminding everybody to actually go vote in your municipal elections. They are important. They make important decisions about things like data centers and other things as well. But as they weigh their options, what's the elevator pitch you've been giving to folks as you go to the doors for why you should have the job of mayor of Cambridge?
Well, the first thing is the best predictor of the future is the past. And so I've got my track record up on my website. I've been on council for 6 years. You can go and see the motions I've brought forward and the work I've done, whether it's for affordable housing, the environment, seniors and older adults, youth. It's all up there. So elections are times when, as a voter, you're going to have a lot of people telling you a lot of things, and a lot of it may not be factually accurate. So the best way to check is by looking into someone's history. What has this person done in the past that convinces me that the future might be something along the lines of what they're promising or what they're telling me? And I think my track record stands for itself. And we discussed some of it today, and it's up on my website for anyone that wants to check it out. But for leadership, I think we need a forward-thinking Cambridge. We need a leader that's going to understand and embrace the changes that are coming down the pipeline for us. We need someone that's collaborative, that's engaging, and that is outgoing. Like, I'm out there knocking on doors every day and going to residents because I want them to know my leader can care, they put in the effort to come to me and not vice versa, and that they've got energy to do the job, right? And I have 2 young children. My dad is here in Cambridge in a long-term care home. So I think I'm right in the middle of a series of significant life issues that pertain to thousands of our residents. And I'm able to at least take those issues and align them with policies that will be beneficial for everyone as a community as a whole. So again, making a Cambridge that's affordable, that's safer, that's connected and more exciting. That's my vision for it. That's my goal. And that's why my 3 campaign pillars are progress, stability, and hope. And just building a Cambridge that works for you. And together with residents, I'm confident we can do that. And I'll be at the doorsteps repeating this mantra from now until October 26th. And I have to say, I hope people vote, because the last election was the lowest voter turnout in the history of the city. It was 28%. So I think we can do better, and we will.
I think that's a great call out. One last thing. How are you spending Canada Day?
It's a great question. There's a Canada Day parade, which is fun. We always walk in that. There are some events around the city, different community groups, churches, mosques. And I have a friend who always has a Canada Day barbecue, and no matter what, I can't miss it. But no matter what, my family is there hanging out. We live in the greatest country in the world. Despite everything that's going on, we can never forget that. So I'm just excited to be out with the community celebrating Canada.
I love it. Barbecue is always the right answer for that.
Yep.
Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your time and your questions, Teresa. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.